The arrogant young architect tore up the dusty laborer's sketch and threw it in the trash. He looked the old man in the eye and told him to stick to pouring concrete. What the architect didn't know was that the torn piece of paper was about to save a billion-dollar skyscraper from collapsing. And more importantly, it was about to permanently end his own career. The Atlas Tower was going to be the crown jewel of the city skyline. A $1.2 billion project featuring a revolutionary floating glass lobby. The man in charge of this masterpiece was Marcus Vance, 32 years old, wearing custom Italian suits under his pristine white harness. Marcus had graduated at the top of his class and let everyone know it. He didn't care about the physics. He cared about the aesthetics. He cared about the magazine covers his building would be featured on. To Marcus, the construction workers on his site were just tools, replaceable, invisible, especially men like William. William was 68 years old. He wore faded blue overalls covered in dried cement dust and steel-toed boots that had seen decades of work. He was hired as a basic concrete inspector, a low-level job. He rarely spoke. He ate his lunch alone on a stack of wooden pallets, quietly observing the massive steel beams being lifted into the sky. But behind William's quiet eyes was a mind that understood weight, wind shear, and structural load better than any computer software. For 3 weeks, William had been watching the construction of Marcus's prized floating glass lobby. And for 3 weeks, William realized a terrifying truth. Marcus's software had miscalculated the harmonic resonance of the steel joints. If a strong winter storm hit the city, the wind would create a vibration that the glass lobby couldn't support. It wouldn't just crack, it would shatter, bringing the first 10 floors down with it. On a Tuesday morning, Marcus Vance was giving a tour of the site to a group of investors. He was pointing at the massive steel frame, boasting about his genius design. William walked up to the group. He didn't want to embarrass the young architect, so he waited patiently. When Marcus finally paused, William held out a piece of grid paper. It was covered in complex hand-drawn mathematical equations and a sketch of the lobby's structural joints. "Mr. Vance," William said quietly, his voice raspy from years of breathing construction dust. "I've been looking at the load distribution on the east wall. The joint tolerances are too tight. If the wind hits 60 miles an hour, you're going to have a catastrophic failure. I've sketched the correction here." Marcus stared at the old man. Then he looked at the investors, who were murmuring nervously. Marcus's face flushed with anger. His ego couldn't handle being corrected in front of the people holding the checkbook. "Are you a structural engineer, old man?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with venom. William looked down at his dusty boots. "I know how buildings stand up. You know how to pour concrete," Marcus sneered. He snatched the paper from William's hand. "My design was rendered by a supercomputer. You are a day laborer." Without even looking at the math, Marcus tore the paper in half. Then he tore it again. He dropped the pieces into a muddy puddle at William's feet. "You're fired," Marcus said coldly. "Get your tools and get off my site." William didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just looked at the torn paper in the mud, nodded slowly, and walked away. The next morning, the site was shut down. A fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the construction gates. The owner of the project, a billionaire real estate developer named Richard Sterling, had arrived for an unannounced inspection. Marcus rushed out to greet him, wearing his best suit. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor. I'd love to show you the progress on the lobby." Sterling ignored him. He was walking around the foundation, inspecting the work. As he walked past a concrete pillar, something caught his eye in the dried mud. It was a piece of torn grid paper. Sterling knelt down. He carefully picked up the 2 torn pieces and put them together. He stared at the hand-drawn equations. But more importantly, he stared at the small, distinct signature in the corner of the math. A capital W with a unique loop. Sterling's face went completely pale. He turned to Marcus. "Who drew this?" Marcus laughed nervously. "Oh, that. Just some delusional old laborer who thought he knew better than my software. I fired him yesterday for insubordination." Sterling's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "What was his name William, I think," Marcus stuttered, realizing something was terribly wrong. "Find him," Sterling barked at his security team. Now, 10 minutes later, they found William packing the last of his tools into a rusted pickup truck at the edge of the site. Sterling, the billionaire who terrified politicians and CEOs, practically sprinted toward the old man. To the absolute shock of Marcus and the entire construction crew, Sterling stopped in front of William and bowed his head respectfully. He reached out and shook the dusty laborer's hand with both of his. "William," Sterling said, his voice trembling, "I had no idea you were on this site. Why didn't you call me?" William smiled softly. "I retired, Richard. I just took this job because I miss the smell of wet concrete." Marcus stepped forward, completely confused. "Mr. Sterling, what is going on?" "He's just a concrete inspector." Sterling turned to Marcus, his eyes blazing with fury. "You arrogant fool," Sterling said loudly. "This man is William Harrison, the legendary structural engineer who designed 3 of the tallest buildings in the world. He wrote the textbooks you studied in college." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His knees went weak. "He tried to save your building," Sterling continued, holding up the torn paper. "And you tore it up. You didn't just ignore a warning. You insulted the greatest architectural mind of our generation." Sterling pointed to the gate. "You are fired, Marcus. And I will make sure every firm in this city knows why." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He took off his pristine white hardhat, dropped it, and walked off the site in complete humiliation. Sterling turned back to William. "Will you take over the project?" William looked up at the massive steel skeleton of the tower. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pencil, and smiled. "Yeah," William said quietly. "Let's fix that lobby."